What happens when a legendary martial artist and Hollywood icon sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to realize he's walked into a trap? Tonight, we unpack the explosive confrontation that sent security rushing onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, and the moment Chuck Norris stood up, not just for himself, but for something bigger. This isn't just about one man. It's about respect, dignity, and what happens when a talk show host crosses a line that should never be crossed. Make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment below, because after this, you'll never see late-night television the same way. Again, Chuck Norris walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage with the quiet confidence of a man who has nothing left to prove. His stride was calm, measured, each step echoing the discipline of a life forged through martial arts and decades of Hollywood success. The audience erupted, genuinely thrilled to see the living legend in person. He offered a nod, a faint smile, and took his seat with the kind of precision only a man like Chuck could make look effortless. "Chuck Norris, everybody," Jimmy said, that trademark grin plastered across his face. "Thanks for being here, Chuck." "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Chuck replied, his voice steady, respectful. It started light. "So, Chuck, I've got to ask." Jimmy leaned in, casual but just a little too sharp. "There are all these Chuck Norris facts online. You know Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice, or Chuck Norris can divide by 0. What do you think about becoming this kind of internet meme?" Chuck chuckled softly. "Well, Jimmy, I think it's flattering. Some of those jokes are pretty clever. My family gets a kick out of them." Jimmy nodded, but the smile he returned was colder, sharper. Right, he said. "But don't you ever feel like those jokes turned you into a parody of yourself? I mean, when's the last time you actually did something that lived up to the Chuck Norris myth?" the audience murmured. The air shifted. Chuck's posture changed just slightly. Anyone trained in martial arts would recognize the shift. Readiness. Control. "I'm not sure I understand the question," he said, voice even. Jimmy leaned in further. "Come on, Chuck. You're 80 now. You do infomercials for fitness machines. You haven't done a real movie in years. Isn't it time to admit the Chuck Norris mystique is just that? A mystique." The room had gone quieter. Uncomfortably so. Chuck took a beat, then answered. "Jimmy, I've had a long career doing what I love. I've entertained millions, taught martial arts around the world, served my country. I don't feel the need to prove anything at this point in my life." But Jimmy wasn't done. "See, that's just it," he said, voice growing sharp now, confrontational. "You built a whole persona around being unbeatable, invincible. But what have you really done that's so legendary? Bruce Lee was a philosopher. Jackie Chan still does his own stunts. Even Steven Seagal. Okay, maybe not the best example, but still. What makes you so special?" A nervous chuckle from the crowd. But Chuck wasn't laughing. He fixed Jimmy with a look that silenced the room. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jimmy?" "I'm just saying." Jimmy shrugged, spreading his hands like it was all harmless. "Maybe it's time for some honesty. You were a middling action star in the 80s and 90s. You won some karate tournaments, did a TV show, and somehow you became this larger-than-life figure. Isn't it possible you've started believing your own hype?" Silence. Chuck's response came low, firm, and full of controlled intensity. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my life, my family, my work, to share stories with your audience. I didn't come here to be disrespected." Jimmy forced a laugh, but his tone faltered. Chuck, come on. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what interviews are for? Or do you only show up when people kiss your ring and pretend you're some kind of superhero? There's a difference between asking questions, Chuck said, still as a statue, and trying to tear someone down for your own entertainment. At that moment, even the cameras seemed to freeze. The tension was real, tangible, security. Stepped toward the edge of the set. Chuck Norris didn't need to raise his voice. He had already made himself heard. "What you're doing right now," Chuck said, his voice low and firm. "This isn't journalism. It's not even good television. It's just mean-spirited." Jimmy's grin had started to stiffen, more mask than expression. Now, "Oh, come on, Chuck," he said with mock sympathy. "Can't handle a few tough questions? What happened to the guy who was supposed to be tougher than nails? You gonna cry? Want me to get you a tissue?" There was a sharp intake of breath from the audience. A few gasped outright. Chuck turned slowly, deliberately, to look directly at Jimmy. And in that moment, something changed. For the first time all night, Jimmy seemed to realize he might have gone too far. "You know what, Jimmy?" Chuck said, calm but final. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with professionals, real journalists, who ask hard questions because they care about the truth. And I've dealt with amateurs who ask tough questions just to make themselves look clever at their guests' expense." Jimmy tried to keep his tone light, but his confidence was faltering. "And which one am I?" Chuck didn't blink. "You tell me. Is this how you treat all your guests? Or am I just the special target tonight?" The studio had gone silent. Even the band looked uncomfortable. The playful rhythm of late-night banter had died completely. Everyone could feel it. This was no longer entertainment. Jimmy shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. But instead of pulling back, he pushed forward, pride flaring. "Look, Chuck," he said, trying to regain control. "You're being a little sensitive here. This is comedy. This is what we do. We poke fun. We keep things interesting. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged." Chuck's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Challenged? Jimmy, I've been challenged by fighters who could break ribs. With a single strike, I've been pushed to the limit by directors demanding perfection in high-risk stunts. I've faced loss, injury, and sacrifice you couldn't begin to imagine. What you're doing right now isn't a challenge. It's an attempt to humiliate me. For laughs." Jimmy scoffed, trying to shake off the tension. "Come on, Chuck. You're a public figure. You've built a whole brand off being this invincible guy. Don't you think people deserve to know what's real? I mean, let's be honest. When was the last time you were in an actual fight? Not some choreographed movie or exhibition match. A real fight." It was bait, and Chuck knew it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. But the steel in his tone was unmistakable. "Are you asking me to prove something to you right now, Jimmy? Because if that's what this is really about, we can settle it. Right here, right now." The audience gasped. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. For the first time, Jimmy's smile cracked for real. "Whoa, whoa, Chuck," he said quickly, raising both hands in mock surrender. "I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to admit the whole Chuck Norris legend is just that, a legend. A brilliant piece of marketing, Hollywood smoke and mirrors." Chuck stared at him. "So you think that's all I am? Smoke and mirrors?" Jimmy leaned forward, regaining some of his swagger. "I think you're a smart businessman who turned a modest martial arts career into a brand. And hey, good for you. But let's not pretend you're actually the superhero the memes make you out to be." Chuck didn't answer immediately. He studied Jimmy the way a seasoned fighter sizes up an opponent. Calm, focused, assessing. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Jimmy, let me ask you something. Do you know what respect means?" Jimmy waved the question off. "Of course I do." "I don't think you do," Chuck said. "Because if you did, you'd know that respect isn't something you demand by sitting behind a desk with cameras pointed at you. It's something you offer. To your guests, to your audience, to anyone who's earned it. Especially in your own house." "This is my show, Chuck," Jimmy snapped. "This is my house, and I'll ask whatever questions I want." Jimmy leaned in, voice sharp. "I'll just ask you straight. If you don't like the questions, Chuck, you're free to leave. Is that what you want? Want to walk off set?" Chuck didn't flinch. "I want you to ask real questions, not try to tear me down behind this smug act you call journalism." Jimmy's tone grew more aggressive. "I want you to drop the mystique, Chuck. Stop hiding behind the legend. Admit it. Chuck Norris, the icon, is just a character. And Chuck Norris, the man? He's just another aging actor clinging to relevance." The studio fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. Chuck stared at Jimmy for a long, measured beat. Then, with calm precision, he stood. The movement was smooth, controlled. Yet there was unmistakable power behind it. The room felt smaller. Chuck's voice cut through the silence. "You're right about one thing, Jimmy. Chuck Norris, the legend. He never gets angry, never loses control. Always calm, collected." He took a small step forward. Jimmy swallowed hard. "But Chuck Norris, the man, he spent a lifetime learning discipline, respect, honor. And Chuck Norris, the man, doesn't take kindly to being insulted by someone who thinks sitting behind a desk makes him tough." Jimmy tried to reassert himself. "Chuck, sit down. You're making this awkward for everyone." Chuck gave a dry laugh. "I'm making this awkward? You invited me here as your guest, then spent every second trying to tear me down. You've been rude, unprofessional, and frankly, a disgrace. And now I'm the one making it awkward." Jimmy bristled. "Maybe if you can't handle a little ribbing, you shouldn't do interviews." Chuck stepped closer. "Ribbing. Jimmy, there's a difference between light-hearted banter and humiliation. What you're doing isn't comedy. It's cruelty dressed up as cleverness. And the worst part? You think being the host gives you the right." Jimmy opened his mouth, but Chuck wasn't done. "In martial arts, we have a word. Honor. It means respecting your opponent, even when you're fighting them. It means you don't win by degrading the other person. You win by lifting yourself up. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" He gestured toward the studio. "Everything here is built on mockery, tearing people down for a cheap laugh." Jimmy weakly pushed back. "This is entertainment, Chuck. People tune in to see celebrities get grilled. It's the job." Chuck shook his head. "No, Jimmy. What you're doing is bullying, and the fact that you can't tell the difference says everything about your character." Cameras hovered uncertainly. The audience was frozen, silent, caught between shock and awe. Jimmy chuckled nervously. "All right, Chuck. I think you're overreacting. This is how late night works. We joke, we poke. We don't take things so seriously. Maybe you've just been out of showbiz too long." Chuck stepped up to Jimmy's desk. The host instinctively leaned back. "Let me make something clear," Chuck said, voice low and deliberate. "I haven't forgotten showbiz. I remember when entertainers had class, when hosts respected their guests. What I see here tonight, this isn't show business. It's a sad little man trying to feel big by making others feel small, Jimmy's pride flared. Hold on now. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me about my job. I've been doing this for years. Presidents, pop stars, you name it. And they all understood that this comes with the territory. Chuck raised an eyebrow. The territory? You mean the part where you think having a microphone gives you a license to belittle people? Where you mistake cruelty for cleverness? I'm not insulting you, Jimmy protested, voice faltering. I'm asking real questions about your career and your image. No, Chuck said firmly. A real question. That would sound like, Chuck, how did you transition from martial arts to film? Or, what advice would you give young martial artists? Or even, how do you feel about the internet memes? He stared Jimmy down. But that's not what you wanted, was it? You didn't want insight. You wanted a takedown. And now, you're finding out the hard way. When you come for the legend, you better know who the man really is. Chuck paused, letting his words settle over the room like a storm cloud. Then he continued, his voice even but unmistakably stern. But that's not what you asked, was it? Instead, you questioned my accomplishments, mocked my age, implied I was a fraud, and tried to bait me into proving myself to you like some kind of trained animal. He leaned in slightly. That's not journalism, Jimmy. That's harassment. Off stage, Jimmy's producer was waving frantically, signaling for him to dial it back. But Jimmy, clearly driven by ego now, ignored the warning. If you can't handle the heat, Chuck, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen, Jimmy said, leaning on the oldest cliché in the book. This is television. It's entertainment. If you wanted a softer touch, maybe you should have gone on Ellen. That did it. Chuck's face hardened. His voice, when it came, was low and authoritative. The kind of tone forged by years of quiet. Discipline. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. If I wanted to be treated with respect, I should have gone somewhere else, because clearly, respect is something you neither understand nor practice. He began unclipping his microphone, his movements slow and deliberate. Whoa, what are you doing? Jimmy asked, realization dawning as Chuck rose from his seat. I'm doing what I should have done 10 minutes ago, Chuck replied, calmly. Removing myself from a toxic situation. You can't just leave in the middle of an interview, Jimmy stammered, his voice now tinged with panic. Watch me. Come on, don't be so sensitive, Jimmy pleaded, flailing for control. We're just having a conversation. This is good television. Chuck turned to face him one last time. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. No, Jimmy. This isn't good television. It's a train wreck. And the saddest part is, you don't even see it. You think humiliating your guests makes you clever? But all it does is make you look small. Jimmy's voice cracked on the comeback. Small, Chuck nodded. Yes, small. Insecure. Desperate for attention. He stepped closer to the edge. Of the stage. I've met all kinds of people in my life. Heroes and cowards, champions and cheats. But I've never met anyone so eager to prove they're tough that they'd attack a guest on their own show. Jimmy, now red-faced, stood up behind his desk. You think you're better than me, huh? Just 'cause you know karate, you think you can come on my stage and disrespect me? I don't think I'm better than you, Jimmy, Chuck replied, softly. I just think I'm better than this. Security began to move, but Chuck raised a hand, halting them. There's no need, he said calmly. I'm leaving voluntarily. Unlike some people, I know when to walk away. Fine, go ahead and leave, Jimmy shouted, his voice cracking. "Run away like the coward you really are." Chuck paused at the edge of the stage. Slowly he turned, back. The entire studio was silent. No laughter, no clapping, just tense anticipation. "Jimmy," Chuck said, his voice steady. "I've been called a lot of things over the years. Tough, disciplined, determined. I've even been called stubborn and difficult. But in 40 years of show business, no one, until tonight, has ever called me a coward." He nodded slightly. "Congratulations. You were the first." And with that, Chuck Norris walked off the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live. No fanfare, no music, just the stunned silence of an audience watching a man leave with his dignity intact, while their host stood frozen behind his desk. Jimmy looked out toward the camera, visibly rattled, gripping his microphone like a lifeline. "Well," he muttered, barely audible, "I guess. That's Chuck Norris, everybody." But the damage had been done. What was supposed to be a light-hearted interview turned into a public unraveling, not of Chuck, but of Jimmy. The night he tried to mock, a legend, and ended up exposing himself instead. What do you think? Did Chuck handle it the right way? Or should he have stayed and finished the fight? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this one.